Hello, I'm Angela Nicholson. I'm the co-founder of Camera Jabber and the founder of She Clicks. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Sarah Waiswa, who is a portrait and documentary photographer based in Kenya, born in Uganda, who's done some really, really interesting projects about African society and culture. Hi, Sarah, how are you?
Hi, I'm great, Angela. Thanks for having me.
I really enjoyed looking at some of your pictures, but I was instantly sort of wondering, where does your love of photography come from?
Well, I think I've always been a creative person. Being from the continent and in the time that I grew up, creativity wasn't really fostered. Our parents would constantly say, the careers that paid were either being a doctor or an engineer or lawyer, those types of jobs. And so I think my creativity was kind of was subdued for a while. And I went off to college and studied, psychology and sociology. And it wasn't until I came back home that, I picked up a camera and started shooting. And I think the reason that I did that was it was the way that I was able to best kind of document what I was feeling, what I was seeing after having been gone for a while. So that's kind of where I came from. But of course, I also love the archived photos of my family and the old photo albums and looking at fashion and just looking at, how, what life was like. And so I enjoy that as well. So I think that, that's also kind of been a big influence on me as well.
So would you say that it's your family history and family photographs that are more influences on your photography than perhaps some of the great photographers that we often look at?
No, well, I mean, I think because I didn't go to art school, that I wasn't able to, that I've kind of come to study the work of others over time. And so, when I started photography, there was definitely, different photographers whose work that I was drawn to. So, for example, Malik Sidibe and the great, African studio portrait photographers, or just even the more contemporary photographers of this current period, like Zanelli and her use of portraiture to kind of address social issues. So as I grew in my career in photography, I also kind of learned about the work of other photographers, and so I think it all kind of came hand in hand. So there was the influence from the family portraits and the history there, but there was also the influence in me being so eager to kind of learn about photography, and particularly how it was kind of establishing itself on the continent, or how it had kind of where it had come from.
And would you say that your degree in sociology and psychology helped inform your photography at all or influenced it?
Absolutely. I think a lot of the work that I choose to make now is definitely influenced by social issues. So whether it's a series that I did on albinism, or whether I maybe look at religion as a form of identity. I think it's all really related to this sociology piece of it. And in terms of psychology, it just makes it great for me to be able to connect with people and to listen. So I think definitely it has an influence in the subjects and topics that I choose to work on.
Is photography part of how you understand a situation? Does it sort of help you work your way through an idea or a project?
Absolutely. I think for me, I'm not very good with words. So it is difficult for me to express myself verbally, or even in written form. But I feel that I can take a photograph, and to me can it will express maybe kind of how I'm interpreting the situation. So definitely photography is my language.
And when I knew I was going to be speaking to you, I obviously looked at your website and I had a look at your introduction, your biography there, and you mentioned that your change from what you were doing, your sort of corporate job, to
Mhm.
becoming a full-time photographer was most difficult and also the easiest decision that you ever made. And I just wondered, what were the two sides that were pulling you? Why was some aspects easy and others a difficult
I,
decision?
I think for me it was a given.
Mhm.
When I picked up a camera, I knew immediately, like that that's what I was meant to be doing.
Mhm.
Um, So it was easy from the perspective of I knew that I knew that whatever way it went, that I was following kind of my passion. But at the same time, when you've worked, I mean, I'd been working since I was probably 16 years old. So I had a job from that time. And so, when you get used to kind of that structure and, having a steady paycheck and all that, then, kind of jumping into a life of freelance and creation, so I think that was the challenge, was just kind of stepping out into the unknown. But at the same time, trusting that, that this is what I was supposed to be doing. And really, it worked out because, things kind of fell into place. So it kind of confirmed that that's what I was supposed to be doing.
Yes. And I think, the concerns that you're talking about, a lot of people can identify that they face with it. But how did you overcome those concerns?
Well, I think, as I was working in the corporate job, I had started kind of getting, photography work. So people would commission me to do different things. And then it got to a point where I was unable to do both. So I thought, well, at least there's interest out there. There is, it's not like I'm just starting from scratch. So I figured that, you know, that the work that I was creating, and the name kind of that I was, and the brand that I was creating for myself, that I could, get work. But of course, it was never a guarantee. I just trusted, I just trusted the universe. I just went with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes you just got to go with the flow, haven't you? And see
You
what
just
happens.
got to go with the flow, So yeah, that's kind of what I did.
Do you think that sort of working for some time in a corporate environment has helped you become a better or a more organized photographer, would you say? Has it helped you learn about planning and structuring, or is it a completely different approach?
I think in some ways, yes, because when it comes to administrative things, I'm pretty good at that, putting my invoices together if I have to, following up on emails, that kind of thing, because I guess I was kind of used to doing that. But I feel that when it comes to like my workflow and like organizing my, structure in terms of my photography, yeah, it's not as structured. So I guess I have the best of both worlds.
Yes. So, I mean, thinking about your photography, what is it that makes you stop and capture a moment?
A lot of the projects I work on are kind of things that I've researched, and so that obviously requires a lot more thought process and research, like I said. But I also like street photography, for example.
Mhm.
So I think I'm currently on a project that's documenting one of the only kind of public parks in the city, and so for me, I think it could be anything. It could be a person's face that's interesting, or it could be the way the light is falling on a certain somehow, or it could be it just depends, really depends on the situation. But I am drawn to people a lot, so I guess that's kind of why I'm more interested in portraiture. But I find myself drawn a lot to people and faces and yeah, and things that they're doing, I guess.
Now, I noticed that your projects that generally seem to be around people, but you just mentioned one on
Mhm.
parks. Is that about the people
Mhm.
in the parks, or is it about the park itself?
Well, that park has a lot of historical significance for the country. One of the great environmental activists, kind of made sure that that park was still around, Wangari Maathai. And so, what's interesting to me is, not everybody goes to that park. So I'm interested in the people that go to that park.
Mhm.
Um, it kind of serves the less privileged. It's like the only open space, public space. So people who don't have the funds to go to to the private kind of parks and the privilege to attend those, kind of, this is like their escape. And so I'm interested in the type of people, in people that go there, and what is kind of the social issues around the park and the environment issues, obviously, because they're now also constructing part of the a highway through the park.
So, this park is obviously very important to you in your life, but are you documenting this as an observer, or are you interacting with the people in the place?
I think for right now, I'm more of an observer. But you know, as I continue to go back more, then people are noticing me more. So, for example, they have like local photographers that take like instant photos of people and print them out and sell them. And that's kind of their work. So they're really interesting because some of them have worked there for years. And then there's people that give like horse and camel rides to the kids. Like there's a lot of activity going. But and a lot of times, actually, people will come up to me and be like, "Oh, can you take a photograph? How much are you charging?" So there is some interaction. Of course, people on the continent in general don't really like to be photographed. You can do street photography quite easily in Europe, in the West, or in America. I think people aren't as kind of. I mean, of course, not everyone, but it's a lot easier to kind of randomly be carrying your camera around and just pull it out. But here, people are a little bit more suspicious, and so sometimes I get some odd stares.
Oh, that's really interesting. So do you find that, say, with some of your other projects where it's you sort of blend documentary and portraiture, and sometimes you have a model in there, and sometimes it seems like you're doing more observational stuff. Do
Mhm.
you find that you really have to get to know the people for them to trust you and just sort of carry on with what they're doing?
I think with any project that it's much more helpful if you know the person. I think a lot of times, if I'm working on a personal project, then I definitely try to get to know the collaborators of the story. And I say collaborators because if you're telling someone else's story, you really should be collaborating on that. I don't think you can ever tell someone else's story. So in that, I try to visit as many times as possible, to interact with them and just to understand, what it is, that they're going through, and that type of thing. But sometimes I get assignments which are more kind of the photojournalism assignments, and you can't. It's like a 1 day assignment. You kind of have to go in, photograph and kind of leave. But my preference definitely is to kind of try to get to know the subjects or the collaborators, because I think that helps with the storytelling.
And with your bigger projects, do how much planning is involved with that?
I think it depends on the project. I'm currently working on a project now, that's looking at teen pregnancy, which has spiked during this pandemic.
Mhm.
And because it's so sensitive, and it's a personal project, it's not commissioned. So I've taken, yeah, I've been going to, there's a center that I'm working with. I've been going there, for about a month, and I haven't photographed anything. So I think it depends on the story. For the ballet project, even there, I went, 2 or 3 times just so the students could kind of get used to me being there, that I didn't go the first day and was already clicking away. So I
Mhm.
think for me, if I have the time, then I try to try to spend a little time beforehand to try to kind of create that sense of comfort.
And with your project about people with albinism, a stranger in a familiar land, I
Mhm.
mean, obviously, how did you first become aware of that as an issue? And it must have been, and thinking about creating it as a project to approaching someone and then getting them involved.
So for that project, the way that I became aware of that situation was, I came across an article that was talking about the atrocities that people with albinism were facing in parts of Africa, and I was kind of struck by I had never. I mean, of course, there is a lot of belief kind of in African traditional practices, but I had never specifically kind of heard about that. How people with albinism were being treated, and so that led me to kind of do some more research and read about it, and then to approach the Albinism Society of Kenya, and they connected me to Florence, who is the collaborator in the work, and then that's kind of how that came about.
Was Florence already working as a model?
No, she wasn't, but she wanted to be a model. So it kind of worked out perfectly, yeah, because that was one of her dreams. She was like, I would love to be a model.
It's certainly a very striking series of images that you created there. I think it's fantastic. So, but
Thank you.
did you feel, or did you feel that she was in danger at all when you were shooting?
No. Um, when you look at that story, I mean, of course, you can't really say what because there are people even in the city who practice traditional African kind of religious belief, or juju or whatever you want to call it.
Mm.
Um, but it's not, you're going to find more of that in the more rural areas. In the city, you're not really, I mean, people will look and stare, but will not physically, harm an individual in broad daylight.
Yeah.
But of course, that's always a concern. But, kind of made sure that when we were going around, I had somebody of my friends, he's also a guide in the area, that was with us as well. So it wasn't just me and her. So it was kind of a group of us, about five of us.
Right. Bearing in mind, I mean,
Mhm.
you're walking around with quite an expensive camera as well, taking photographs, not necessarily paying attention to what's going on.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. But you have to, the other day, I went to the park with my partner, and, I was like, I'm gonna take some photos, for the project. And he was so afraid. He was like, oh, I think somebody's following us. Oh, watch your camera. And I think, as a photographer, as a woman photographer, as much as you are concerned about, security and those types of things, is that you do have to, on one side, be conscious of your environment and safety, but at the
Mm.
same time can't be overly afraid, because I think then you probably wouldn't be able to shoot anything.
Perhaps, as you say, as a woman, you have to be careful anyway, but you're tuned to it. You've always got your ear sort of listening for someone walking up behind you or something like that.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I noticed in some of your images that your model is almost it looks like she's levitating. Was that the look that you were going for?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that the research, one of the things that the articles said was, that people with albinism had some sort of supernatural powers, and so that's kind of what I was channeling, this idea that that people were kind of trying to, believing that, and therefore wanting to have a piece of hair, or wanting to, to use their bones. I mean, that's kind of what the article was alluding to, essentially.
Right. I mean, a piece of hair is one thing, but a bone is another, completely different.
Right. That yes, yeah,
Yeah.
and I don't say that lightly. I don't say that lightly. Yeah.
Mm. Um, and what has the reaction been to the project so far?
It's been pretty positive, but there's always going to be criticism. And I think as a creative or as an artist, that when you create work, that not everybody is going to interpret it the way that you intend, or in a positive way. But I think for
Mm.
the most part, it has been pretty positive. I have you know I had a parent email me from I think from France, and she was like, "Oh, my daughter did a project on albinism because she saw your work, and had never heard of it, and was really interested in doing. So those types of things, is that, am I going to change people's minds about, an issue? No, but, even if one person or two people, can become aware of a situation, I think that's essentially kind of what I'm hoping for, is that someone will then be able to engage with the work, and, get something from it.
Yeah. And you say, do some people sometimes just not realize what you're trying to convey? That could be very frustrating, I think, as a photographer, when you're trying to show sympathy and support to a sector of society, and you say some people aren't quite getting it.
But isn't that how life is, Angela? I mean,
I guess
I
so, yeah.
think that people stand by on the sidelines, waiting to be critical of something or the other. So, I think for the most part, it's been positive, and I'm open to criticism as well. So,
Is it a project that you're continuing with?
no, I haven't. I did do a follow-up project,
Mm.
which was still a stranger, because I wanted to kind of speak with, because of course, most of my subjects tend to be female, and that's just kind of what my interest is. However, as a follow-up to that, thought it would be interesting to see what life was like for a male with albinism, and if the issues were similar. So, but I don't, I'm not certain that it will go further than that.
Okay. And
Yeah.
what was your inspiration for the ballet project?
Well, so that was interesting for me is because when I was younger, of course, was privileged enough to attend a few ballet classes. But I know that even at that time that it was really expensive, and when I heard about this project, it was interesting for me because typically ballet has been, especially here on the continent, it's like a very kind of prestigious, expensive kind of thing to partake in. And so I was interested in the juxtaposition of the two things. So you have ballet on one hand, and then you have these girls, an informal settlement. And I wanted to know how they were married and what the outcome of that was, and what effect that it was having on the girls. And I was interested in that, just to see how um, this kind of form of expression had made its way there, and how it was being received.
And there's one picture in particular where a child is holding a very elegant pose with the scene beyond. And it
Mm-hmm.
just looks like,
Mm-hmm.
were they actually in the school there, or were they practicing their move?
Yeah, no, that's in the class, like during
Right.
one of the classes. Yeah, it
Hmm.
was during the class. And of course, when I say class, it's like, the even the environment itself wasn't, what you typically see, ballet dancers in. It's just a really modest kind of cement room, with barely any light. And here these girls were transformed at that moment as they were dancing. So I think that's kind of what made it so visually just amazing, kind of to watch.
And what was your decision for making that a monochrome project rather than color?
Because I felt that like when I think about ballet, I think about pink, I think about tutus, I think about and so I didn't want that to be a distraction.
Right.
Even with the color, then you would be noticing the dirt on the wall, the environment a lot more. And I really wanted the focus to just kind of be on the girls and the moment that was happening. So I think that was part of that.
Right. So you've mentioned the project on parks. That's or a park that sounds like a long-term project. What else have you been working on recently?
Um, of course I did some work for Dior,
Hmm.
um, which is quite a big thing. I think even when they contacted me, I thought it was like maybe a spam email of some sort. I mean, because of course I'm not a fashion photographer.
Hmm.
But I am interested in fashion, particularly in how fashion influences identity, or the other way around. And so I was contacted. They were essentially looking for 7 African women photographers to interpret the collection, and yeah, and I was one of those photographers.
So how much freedom did you have with that shoot? I mean, were you allowed to pick your own models, or was it turn up to this event and shoot what's here?
No, it was, one, the one was, so what's your interpretation? Like, how do you, what do you see from this collection?
Hmm.
But we were able to choose our own models, our own location, our own lighting, our own,
Hmm.
production, really. So we did really have quite some freedom to express, which was exciting.
Mm. And what
Yeah.
was your aim? What were you trying to capture with those images?
So when I saw the collection, I was immediately kind of drawn to the kitenge fabric, and primarily because it reminded me of my grandmother and my mother, and how that fabric had been interwoven into the lives of women, and African women, and the sense of pride that they have when they wear it. And so I kind of combined that nostalgia that I was feeling at the time, and I combined that with my respect for the Malik Sidibe, and the great African kind of portrait studio, and that's kind of the direction. went into. So I wanted to give that feeling of being in that that old studio, but at the same time capture the pride of wearing that kind of kitenge fabric.
That's really interesting. So you pulled your love really of storytelling into that commercial project.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's what they were looking for. As they chose the photographers, I think they were essentially looking for the individual to kind of pick their way of to kind of bring that to the collection. But it was exciting, of course.
Yes, I bet it was. And so what's in the pipeline for you next?
Like I said, I'm currently doing some research on a teen pregnancy project.
Oh yes.
Yes, so that's what I'm working on in addition to the park project.
So have you actually started shooting anything for the teen pregnancy?
No, I haven't. Like I said, it's quite a sensitive issue, particularly here. Uh, so I'm just kind of navigating now how to visually represent, the issue, and of course that means kind of doing a lot of talking and trying not just to, just to get as much a sense of what's happening in the situation. So not only by talking but also to health workers, to community members, to the parents, to that type of thing. So it is taking a little bit more time.
So I'm sure lots of people are really interested in your planning process for this kind of thing because, it's a bit like you say, you got a call from Dior and the first thing is, what is this spam? How do you approach somebody to do a project? Because suddenly you're elevating to the status of saying, oh, it's really, your story is interesting and I want to turn it into a photographic project. How do you get through that process?
I think that's probably the hardest bit really is like how do you convince somebody that you're the right person to tell their story and why should their story be told and like I said, a lot of times on the continent people aren't really open. We're very kind of closed society, so people don't like talking about their problems or about their issues or about that type of thing. So when you now start come in and say, hey, I want to tell your story, I want to it does take some time. So I think just having the ability to be patient and to communicate and to listen and sometimes even show your work and say, hey, this is kind of another project that I've worked on and this is how I represented this, and just try to help them to understand why, because sometimes people are like, well, why do you want to do it? Are you going to sell my images somewhere? Are you going to that type of thing? So it's just like that conversation, just to also get them to understand exactly why you're interested in it.
I guess there's sort of layers with this one as well of extra sensitivity because obviously you've got the girls themselves and the health
Mm-hmm.
workers working with helping them, but then
Mm-hmm.
their parents who are also dealing with the situation. And whilst their daughter might say, yes, okay, let's go for it, but her parents might turn around and say,
Right.
no.
Yeah, and it's a huge taboo.
Mm,
It's a very taboo topic. The parents are not happy with the girls, and it means for certain girls it means they may never go back to school. So which kind of keeps them in the cycle of poverty. So there's a lot. It's like you said, it's very layered. You also have a government that's not really supportive, of providing access
mm.
um, to reproductive kind of health. So there's a lot going on. And it's I guess when you're trying to work on a project like this, you have to really be conscious of how much can I show, how can I show it, and while being sensitive obviously to the girls and their parents and that type of thing.
Yeah. And I mean, have you worked out your angle yet? Or are you still thinking about that?
I'm still thinking about it, but I think I'm closer. I'm closer to it
Mm.
now. Much closer to it now. Yeah.
I can imagine it's a really tricky one because you don't want to hold the girls up as look to other girls saying, right, this could happen to you. This is a terrible thing.
Right.
But you don't want to promote it as a good thing either. It's a really tricky balance.
It's exactly. It's a tricky balance because again, you also want to empower the girls.
Mm,
You're not saying like, oh, your life is over. You're saying
mm,
like, that you are worthy and you still, because they're facing a lot of isolation. They're, just in the community from their friends and their peers and that type of thing. So, it's also quite an emotional for them as well.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you're working on the parks project. You're thinking through getting towards the latter stages of the planning for your teen pregnancy project. Is there something
Mm-hmm.
else at the back of your mind that you're thinking about? That's going to be the next thing. Sort of, do you have a succession of projects queuing up in your head?
Well, it doesn't work like that per se. I think
Mm.
I think a lot of times, if something comes along, sure, I think even the way I become inspired to work on something really has to do with, it could be an encounter, it could be, like I said, reading an article, it could be reading a book. It just really depends. But right now, that's kind of what I'm working on. I mean, it doesn't help, of course, that the pandemic is here. I also just recently had a baby, so I guess perhaps I'm a little bit, it
Occupied.
has been kind of a little bit occupied. But as a creative, I think you're constantly looking for ways to tell stories. I mean, it's like an inherent need, like I need to create and to tell as many stories as I can.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, you constantly, there's little things pop into your mind and then you work on something and then it might bring something up a bit. You say, oh, I remember
Absolutely.
all
Yeah.
those together. Mm.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Is there anything that you'd like to photograph that you haven't had the opportunity to do so yet?
Oh, I think that's a great question. That's a great question. Um, I I'm very interested in so I grew up, so of course, Uganda and Kenya kind of um, um, were colonized by the British. I'm sure you know that. So a lot of our history from a British kind of perspective. And so I'm very much interested in using photography to kind of to unlearn and relearn
Mhm.
history, particularly where I'm from, which is Uganda, and even in Kenya. So finding ways to use photography to kind of relearn history. And what that means is, it could mean, for example, I thought about, um, so Uganda has a system of, the Kabaka system. We have a president, but we also have a Kabaka. And to me, I'm interested in, what could I photograph the Kabaka and his family, and and look at the history of that system of rule in the country. So I think definitely one of the things that I haven't been able to do is really just dive into that and using photography to relearn what I've learned in the past. I don't know if that makes sense. Sorry.
No, it does. It does. I understand. Yeah. No, I think it's good. So sometimes trying to sort of start with a blank sheet, forget what you
Hmm.
learned at school, and go back and see what you think may have really happened.
Absolutely. And a lot of African history is very oral, right? So
Mhm.
for it's been passed down through generations. And what happens is, of course, as the generations die off, then you kind of lose some of that, right? I was looking at a program, I think it was on Al Jazeera the other day, that was talking about how there's a community in Kenya whose language kind of was disappearing, and they were focusing on that community, and them saying that, well, people have kind of moved on and don't really speak it anymore, and so that it would probably be disappearing in a few years. But that's the kind of thing that I'm interested in, is how can I use my photography to kind of engage with those parts of history that maybe we weren't privy to, that weren't in our textbooks and that type of thing.
So, Sarah, it's been really wonderful speaking with you, and I'm going to be keeping an eye out on your webpage and on your website and on your Instagram feed, looking out for the teen pregnancy project appearing. So it sounds like a really fascinating project, and I think very
That's a lot
challenging.
of pressure, Angela, now.
Sorry for that, and everybody else is going to watch as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for interviewing me.
Thank you. It's been great.